webinar on how to close out the year in your Microsoft Dynamics GP solution. I'm Sarah Novak, Marketing Manager at LBMC Technology Solutions, and just going to go over some quick housekeeping items before we get started. Everyone is muted, and if you have any technical difficulties throughout the webinar, please let me know using the chat panel. We will be taking questions throughout today's webinar, so feel free to submit them at any time. This webinar is eligible for CPE. In order to qualify for CPE credit, you must stay on the entire session and answer all of the polling questions when prompted. If you have any issues with the polling, please either take a screenshot or send me a chat. I'll be sending out the recording for this session in addition to a survey after in a few days' time. So at this time, I'd like to introduce you to Sandy Wickman. Sandy serves as our Senior Business Consultant for Dynamics GP. She has over 20 years of experience with GP. So thank you again for joining us. And Sandy, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Sarah. Thanks very much, everyone. I appreciate you choosing to attend today. We will be following along in an optional training workbook that was provided to you for purchase. It's called Training Dynamo. It was developed by a friend of ours, Amber Bell, and it's called the Year-End Closing Workbook. So because we're following along, I'll be calling out the page numbers on occasion to make sure that you know where we are. And you can certainly make your notes within this workbook so that you can have it available to you for going forward. The nice thing about the workbook is that there are some checklists throughout it that you could potentially use as a template for creating some digital checklists for your period end, or even, if you're kind of old school and just want to make copies of those pages, you can certainly do that as well. So I will be calling those out, and we will be also going back and forth between the slide deck, the PowerPoint slide deck, and the actual GP environment. So we will be actually doing the steps that you'll take within your GP environment, at least through the navigation parts of it, not necessarily every process, because that would take a long time. So we are going to start out on page 5 of your workbook. Congratulations, your business has survived another year, and these economically challenging times. That's actually something good to say about our companies. And to the end of being able to close your GP year end, I want to state clearly that if you can improve your month end or period end close processes, then your year end close will be easy. So we're going to be looking at recommended period end processing. Not everyone uses a month as a period, so we'll use that term interchangeably, a month or a period. But we'll be looking at all of the period end processes as well as the year end, so that you can potentially adopt some new efficiencies in your period end processing. And the biggest issue that we'll discuss is the importance of balancing your general ledger and your subledgers. So the subledgers in some cases are trial balances, in other cases are reports. So we're going to look at each of those as you will be reconciling your subledger to your general ledger for those period ends. Our agenda, we're going to take a look at some pre-closing tasks and some checklists, and then we'll walk through these in a particular set of series. So we'll do the distribution series, which is purchase order and sales order and inventory. We'll do the core modules, receivables, payables, and tax. And then finally, the finance modules of fixed assets and general ledger. We will not be covering payroll closing in this webinar. There are separate webinars that are scheduled for this week that you could choose to sign up for. If you need to have a new link sent for signing up for those, you can certainly put that in the chat and Sarah can follow up with you. So I mentioned that that would be our agenda to close in that particular order, but notice in this slide that the closing workflow actually is intentional to go in this method, right? You want to close the distribution series first, then the core modules, then those additional modules, and finally the general ledger. You would not want to do them in a different order than this. And the distribution series, what we'll find is that those don't have a specific year-end process. We'll talk about them as we get to each module, but the core modules do have specific year-end, as do the additional modules and the general ledger. So within the GP application, the year-end close for the general ledger summarizes all of your activity of your profit and loss accounts for the fiscal year, and it creates an entry to the retained earnings accounts. So you might imagine that profit and loss indicator on your accounts is important because it tells it which accounts to close to retained earnings. For the balance sheet accounts, the year-end close process pushes the final balance of those balance sheet accounts into the beginning balance field for reports and inquiries. So again, pretty important that we know which um, type of account. So we are going to set up some smart lists to verify things that we need to verify, including this balance sheet and P&L, but also vendors, customers, items, unposted transactions. And we're going to review all our post and review all of our transactions and batches for the period. We'll balance those subledgers to the GL for the month and then close the fiscal period. So there are some pre-close activities that you can choose to engage in. Highly recommend them. We're on pages 8 and 9 in the workbook. These pre-close checklists give you an opportunity to do things like reviewing your server. So this is a great opportunity and can be done weeks or even months ahead of your closing of the year, but you should engage with your IT professionals, internal or external, whomever has access to your GP SQL server. And there's an ability to be able to check the server for disk space to make sure it's sufficient to be able to manage the tasks of the year end. And it's a great opportunity for you to check to see if you're low on memory on the server and get that fixed before you attempt closing GP. So again, these are IT related tasks that can be done ahead of you even beginning to prepare. There is a SQL table that you're comparing your space available to, the GL 20,000 table, where you're looking at your row count and comparing it to space. So this slide shows the table properties for the table that we're doing the comparison to, this GL 20,000 table. As we go through these period end steps and our year end steps, there are options to be able to either print or save a copy of the period end or year end reports. So I highly recommend that you either save as a TXT file, or if you have access to it, to save a PDF of these reports rather than printing them to your printers. These reports can be huge, so you may not want to print them out to your printer just so that it's not so burdensome to a printout. We're going to set up a new fiscal year. So one of the things we want to have done ahead of the new year beginning is create our new fiscal year so that we'll have access to those periods when the time comes for us to open those up. So in this case, this will be our first opportunity to jump right over into GP, and I'll show you how to create a new fiscal year. Now, obviously, everything within your GP is controlled by user security. So if you don't have access to the screens that we point to today, you would either need to speak with your GP administrator and or your GP reseller partner to be able to get access to the screens that you need to. So I'm going to go to my administration area page. And in the setup pane, under company, scroll down, is fiscal periods. Now I'm in my Fabricam company, which has years created into the future already. You would not typically create years this far into the future. My next year that would need to be created is 2029. For most of you, that'll be 2023. So in the year field, I'm going to type 2029. And because of my prior fiscal years, it knows to look at 0101 as my first day and 1231 as my last day. And I have 12 periods. So the rest of the window sort of defaults with what's been historically done for my fiscal years. I'm verifying that that's still the case, and then click the Calculate button on the ribbon. Now, if you are still using the older navigation style, there should also just be a button on the ribbon that says Calculate instead of this kind of a button on the ribbon. So it automatically creates my 12 periods, uses those dates that I had indicated. If you like to see the period names changed, you can also change those to what you like to see. And then I will want to close all. This button marks all the boxes so that no one can accidentally post into the future until such time as I individually come in and open the series that I choose to have people post into at the time when I'm ready to open that up for January of the next year. And then click the OK button. And I've now created my new fiscal year setup. It is possible to see the users that are active within your GP application, and we're on page 12 in your workbook. So the navigation to that is under administration as well. You want to make sure during many of these year-end activities that you have validated that there are no users logged into your GP system. So you wouldn't want to necessarily just take everyone's word for it. This window will give you the ability to see what users are active. As of GP 2013 R2, there's an ability in your GP to send the users a message. So you can send a message to users that are actively in GP, and a box will pop up on their GP window and give them a message. In this case, the message might be, please close GP immediately if you're ready to take action on your year-end activities or a particular day and time. Now, this sending users a message only sends the users a message within GP. So if they aren't actively looking at their screen, they may not see the message if you just do it this way. So consider that as well. So I'm going to go back over to GP for a second, and I'll show you that under Administration Area page, in the Utilities section, I have activity detail, user activity, where I can see all the users that are logged into my system. And then down below, I can also find the send users a message, where I can look at the individual users and I can type a message and I can send a notification message and send those to the group of users that are actively logged into my sessions, GP.
Sandy, there was a question about, I was trying to catch you while you were still in GP, about setup. They said they have a fiscal periods that are not calendar periods that operate on a 544
Right?
fiscal period.
Mhm.
Is there an easier way to set that up without having to go in and manually changing the dates in the fiscal period setup windows?
No, sorry to say there's not. You have to just manually change the period dates for the starting of your periods.
Okay, thank you for answering that.
Yes. So batch recovery, we're going to make sure that all of the batches that are in our system have cleared batch recovery and have been posted. Now, batch recovery is the place that sort of collects any batches that don't process through completely. Typically, those include things like errors when an account is inactive or missing, and they will go to batch recovery, and then you have to go in and recover the batch first, which doesn't post it. It just puts it back into the list of batches for you to print the edit list. So on a batch that's been recovered, you print the edit list. It will tell you all the errors within that batch. Then you can address the errors and then post the batch. There are two different ways to be able to find out any any batches that get through batch recovery and or are still waiting to be posted. There's called a master posting window, or you can use a navigation list. So I'm going to go back to GP and we'll look at a few of those things. We're going to look at, I'm going to navigate the old school way just for those of you who like to use this method. Under utilities, excuse me, under routines is batch recovery. So tools, routines, batch recovery, and then just above that is master posting. So batch recovery, this is the place where any batches that have errors would show up in this list. Once you clear the errors, then you would go back to that same sort of location under routines to master posting, and master posting gives you the ability to filter on individual series, so I can go to the financial series and so on through the list. And if there was a batch that I did the recovery on, I can then mark and unmark that so that there's the dotted line around it. Then I open the batch and print the edit list. This edit list will tell me what the errors are. I can address any of those errors and then post the batch, either from this window or from this window. Now, the only batches that don't have to be posted at the time when you do your general ledger year end, the only batches that don't have to be posted are in the sales transactions, where you might have sales orders that have not yet been fulfilled, so you don't want to have those posted yet. It's fine to leave those open in that list. So additionally, you have the option to use a navigation list to see your open batches, in which case you can navigate to a specific area page and then use things like this, payables batches, to be able to see the payables batches that might still be open and available for you to post. Okay, so we looked at master posting. It's our one-stop shop for unposted batches. Okay, this is a most critical step, right? Backups. So before you do any of the closing of any year end, any of the activities for year end closing, make sure that you have a separate, unique backup. Please don't rely on your nightly backups. This should be a separate SQL database backup of the Dynamics database and all the company databases that you could restore to if necessary, if things don't go exactly as you plan. Okay, Sarah, I think we're ready for our first polling question.
Wait, we've got that up and we'll have that open for 2 minutes.
Okay. Hopefully that was enough time for you to get that polling question. I do want to make note then that on page 17 in your workbook, it speaks to making SQL backups of GP databases. If that's something that's new for your IT team or those who have access to the SQL Management Studio, again, we'd be happy to help you at LBMC. Just give us a quick email. We'll be happy to help you with that if that's something that's new for you. One of the nice things about this workbook is there's stories from the GP trenches throughout the workbook. So on page 18 is one of the first ones that that she put into the book, talking about things that happened when people didn't have their specific backups and only relied on their nightly backups. Okay, we're going to talk then about our first module. So we're starting with our distribution series, and the first module is purchase order processing. So there is a checklist on page 19 of the processes that you would take for your period end. So there, we're going to review and post all of our POP transactions for the period. That's shipments, shipment invoices, PO returns. We'll delete any empty, unused batches, print the received not invoiced report, and balance that to the general ledger account for our accrued purchases account. And then optionally, we're going to remove completed purchase orders. So the name of that last one, remove completed purchase orders, is only related to when you don't choose to include history. So I want to make note of that now, and we'll talk about it in detail here in just a moment. This setting for verifying our PO history settings is where we just make sure that all of the history is being saved for our GP. So as in the PO module, obviously in your ERP system, you want to maintain history. That's part of your controls within your system. There are tools that we can move history off if your databases get too big, but we want to maintain the history. So I'm going to show you in GP how to validate these history settings. So within my purchasing area page, I'm going to navigate to Setup and Purchase Order Processing. This section here is what shows that I'm maintaining history for all of the things that I can maintain. If you don't use requisitions in your environment, it doesn't hurt anything to have that box marked, but it does make it consistent. You can just look to make sure that all history is being saved. An important part of the first steps. Then we're going to generate our received not invoiced report. So on my purchasing area page in the reports section, I'm going to choose analysis. In the reports, I'm going to scroll down to the bottom and there's this received not invoiced, or what's commonly referred to as RNI. I'll go ahead and open this report option so you can see that I would typically want to run it for all periods. And typically I would want to include the functional currency, depending on if you're using multi-currency in your environment. Check your destination. I mentioned earlier that we typically want to print these to file, so you can print to file and you can pick what file type, put the location, and click OK. And we'll collect all of these period end reports especially for the 12th period immediately prior to doing our year end. So we'll print that report. And down here at the bottom of the report is a total. This should balance to the period and accrued not invoiced, accrued purchases account in your general ledger. Different companies name that account differently, but it should relate to only one account, that is to collect the balances of anything that was received but not yet invoiced. There are two other reports that are available to you, or options. You can create a smart list that's for this received not invoiced, but I always recommend that you balance this report to your smart list to make sure that there's not any differences between the two. Then you can certainly use the smart list if you like to have it in Excel. And then the other option is, as of GP 2015 R2, there is an SSRS version of the received not invoiced report, which gives you a historical point in time R&I. So you notice that when we ran this one, there was no date cutoff. So if you need to have a historical one that has a date cutoff, then that SSRS version would give you the ability to do that. Okay, let's jump back to our slides and see where we're at. So we verified our history settings. Then the next thing we want to talk about is this removing completed POs. So we're on page 24 in the workbook. Notice that there's a highlighted area in the center that says, if you aren't keeping history, completed purchase orders will be deleted from your company database, right? So POs do not automatically move to history. This function that we're doing here, called remove completed POs, is actually moving them to history because we verified that our history settings are in place to do so. So we're going to go take a quick look at this one. Then our purchasing. In the routines section is remove completed purchase orders. So as you might imagine, just because of the name of it, this is a function that you should restrict by GP user security to only those people who understand the impacts and understand the history settings validation before they run this. So you do have the option to be able to run it based on created dates or created by document dates, particular vendors, or even ranges of PO numbers. So you might choose to do it based on document dates up through the month prior and insert that restriction. You do not have to have any restrictions if you don't choose. I would suggest that you have some restriction in there. So we'll say and insert that. And then the restriction button becomes available to you where you can get even more granular in your selections of things that you do and do not want to move to history. And then you click the process button, which we won't do right now. So our purchase order processing year-end close, there isn't any special routine or button or utility for purchase order processing year-end. Once you've completed the 12th period end checklist, or more if you've got more periods, some people have 13 periods. Once you've completed that last period end checklist, you're complete for the year-end close for purchase order processing. Sarah, do we have any questions?
Nope, I don't see any right now.
Great, thanks. Okay, our next module then in the distribution series is the sales order processing. So again, we'll enter, review, and post all of our sales order processing transactions, delete any empty unused SOP batches, post all the GL batches that were created by SOP if they're not being posted all the way through the GL, verify our history settings, and then an optional step to reconcile remove sales documents, and then close that fiscal period. So again, we're going to verify our history settings. So we're on, the checklist is on page 26 in your manual. We'll go ahead and verify the history settings. And then we're going to look at this reconcile remove documents. And before you do this process, please make sure that you have a backup. So the sales transactions typically move to history automatically, unlike purchase orders. However, if you only transferred part of an order and cancel the remaining quantities, that's one of the situations that may happen where a sales transaction will not automatically move to history. So at least once a year, we recommend doing this reconcile remove the sales documents. You can do it more often if you find that there are more scenarios where things aren't moving to history, like the one that I described. Make sure you have a backup. Make sure you have a backup. Okay. So we're going to go now to our sales area page, and we're going to be verifying that keeping history setup. So I'm going to my sales order processing in the setup pane. And here in this section is my maintain history checkboxes. Again, even if you don't use quotes, there's not a problem for you to keep that box checked. It just gives you some consistency. And if there's no history, it doesn't hurt to have it marked. And then within our utilities section is the reconcile remove sales documents. Now you can, first of all, you can do this checkbox to print the report only and process, and all it will do is give you a report showing you the things that the document selection will be removing. So if you want to put in a selection criteria, you can select for a range of documents. And then click the print report only, and when you process, it will only give you the report. Then you'd come back to this window, unmark that, and then you can either reconcile the documents or remove the completed documents. And that is also documented on page 27 in your workbook. So again, the period end checklist is the last step in your year end, so there is no special routine for sales order processing year end. There is an optional tax year end close. You only have to do the tax year end close once. You don't have to do it after sales order processing and after purchase order processing if you use tax for both modules. You only have to do it once. But we can optionally do it at this point. So on page 28 and on this slide, we're talking about the timing of close processes as it relates to payables and receivables. So if you enter transactions for the next year before you can complete the closing process, you have a couple of choices. You can either enter them into a batch and save them, not post them, or you can go ahead and transact into payables and receivables for next year, and it will be fine. It's not a problem. But there are a few places where there's some year-end or year-to-date values that will not be accurate if you do that. So as an example, the year-to-date and last year information on smart lists and the inquiries won't be accurate because you're actually processing the year end after you've started transacting in the new year. So if you don't rely on those year-to-date or last year numbers, then it's not a problem for you to go ahead and process your year end after 12/31. Page 29 in your workbook has some interesting stories from the trenches as well. So the receivables management is our next module that we're going to close. We're now on to the core modules, so Receivables Management. There's a nice checklist on page 31 if you want to keep track of people taking action against the steps that are necessary. So we're going to post all our AR transaction batches for the period. We're going to do the apply function of applying unapplied documents, and there's either a report or a smart list that we can get those document lists so we know what to apply. We're going to age the customer balances. We're going to print our historical age trial balance dated for the last day of the period, and we'll balance that age trial balance to the general ledger for our AR accounts, and then we'll close the fiscal period. There are some additional steps that are available to you, like doing things like write-off over and under payments, if you choose to take advantage of that kind of thing, finance charges and statements and things like that. There is an opportunity within GP to use a checklist that was created as a part of the programming of GP. The only thing I would say to you is a warning in that the checklists, if you just click on the items to open it, it marks them as completed or dated and timed. It doesn't mean that they actually did the activities they were supposed to do. It just means they opened the window. So for the most part, people don't choose to use these checklists because it's not an accurate representation that someone did the activity they were supposed to do or assigned to do. So we're going to look at our unapplied documents report. And there is a smart list for that as well, and we'll look at that one. And then we're going to do our AR aging. So let's go back to GP. We're still here on our sales area page. And we're going to review our unapplied documents. So there is a report in Sales Reports under Analysis for our unapplied documents. Again, I'll open the option just to see that I want to run it without any restrictions to my report, and I'll print mine to the screen. It gives us a list of all of the documents that have not been applied. So for example, anything where there might be a return that can be applied to a sales document, or a payment that hasn't been applied to a document. All of those kinds of things can be done by reviewing this report and then making those apply transactions. Additionally, you have the ability to be able to open your smart list, and under the sales folder, under receivable transactions, is an unapplied documents that's a part of what was provided to you automatically as a part of your GP application. So this should balance to that GP report and give you the same kind of results where you can use this to be able to do your apply documents. So the applying of documents takes place in the sales transactions. Here and apply sales documents, where I would look up my customer, where I can use my Aaron Fritz, and then any payments, returns, etc. can be selected. Notice that in this case, I only have this one where there's an amount remaining. So it's the only one that I could potentially apply to a document, where I would mark the ones I want it to apply to until such time as my unapplied amount goes down to 0. I don't have to apply it all to one document, and I don't have to apply it all at once. If there's not anything else that one applies to, I can leave my unapplied amount for a future time if it's still available to apply later. Now, if you have already moved apply transactions to history, which happens once the document is fully applied, then there is a tool set called the Professional Services Tools Library, or PSTL, that can be used to move those back from the history tables to be able to unapply them and be able to make them available for you to reapply. If you need help with that PSTL or getting it installed or using it, please contact us. We'd be happy to help you with that. And then we'll look at one more thing here before we go back to our slide deck. In the routines section is aging. So accounts receivable balance do not automatically age in Microsoft GP. It looks like they do when you run the reports, but this aging process allows you to keep your balances in the same buckets as what you might be using for things like collections management, which is a third party that you could potentially be using. They don't necessarily stay in sync if you don't do this aging process. Collections may show a different value. So you should age your AR at least once a month. Many GP users choose to do it every day or at least once a week, but you get to choose. You can leave this marked for no report if you choose to. This report that prints the aging is slightly different than the other ones that come from going to our reports for trial balances. So most companies don't choose to use the report that comes from this aging process. So you can just mark no report and leave it set for all the accounts and all the customers, and then click the process button. It will go through and age your accounts, and then you can run your standard trial balance through the trial balance functions and use either the historical, which gives you a point in time, or the age trial balance with options, which gives you up to a current date. Okay, so that was our aging our AR balances. There's some additional functionalities that I mentioned, like write-off over and under payments. So on this slide, you can see that in this case, I've got a write-off limit of $5. Um, what this functionality typically is used for is if you have some dollar limit that you say, if it's under $5, I really am not going to try and collect it. It's not worth the effort. So I can write off those balances to a particular GL account, and it will do a mass update of any customer balances that are under the limit that you prescribe. Now, there are some additional setups that are necessary in order for you to be able to use that. Those are showing up on page 38 on your workbook. And I always recommend that you do a backup before you do the write-off process, because if anything goes wrong, you've suddenly written off things in your aging that you didn't intend to. That would be a problem in your going forward and cause panic. We don't want panic. Okay, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to verify our customer history settings. So up till now, all of the verify history settings have been at the module level. Starting with this module, receivables, they're at the customer level, not at the module level. So in order for us to be able to look at every single customer would take some time. So we're also going to look at a method to be able to have a smart list give us that information so we don't have to look at every single customer. But first I want to show you where this is on your specific customer setups in GP. So I'm going to my cards section to customer, and I'll look at my Aaron Fritz customer down here on the options button. These settings here are where I'm telling it to maintain history. There is an appendix in the back of your workbook, if you have that, that shows you how to create the smart list. And if we have enough time, I'll do that at the end of the webinar as well. But there's you can create a smart list that has all of those history settings on the smart list where you can look at them at one time. The appendix is appendix number 3 on page 77 in your workbook. So rather than having to look at every single customer, you can do that as a smart list on both customers and vendors. Then we're going to move paid transactions to history. So within the routines section is paid transaction removal. So again, we wanted to make sure we're keeping all the history first. That's very important to validate that before you do this, and then have a backup in case you need to go back to it. You can do this based on a number of different customer ranges if you choose to. And then you have some choices down here at the bottom in the remove box. So for non-sufficient funds, it typically takes about a month before the bank can say that the checks have cleared or payments have cleared without running into a non-sufficient fund situation. So we typically recommend that the cutoff date be about 30 days prior to the current date to give those payments an opportunity to go through NSF validation and not move those to history at least for 30 days. Then they'll still be in the open tables where you can unapply them and indicate their NSF if that happens to be the case. The same is true for the checks. You have the ability to be able to tell it a cutoff date 30 days prior so that you can leave those in open. Once you get those settings, then you click the process button and it takes action. And because I have this check mark marked, it is going to print my report for me. Okay. So we've printed our AR agings. We will have validated those against the GL account for your accounts receivable accounts. And then we're ready for the year-end close. Here's an example of the smart list that you can create to verify those history settings. We did the paid transaction move to history, and we're ready for our year-end close. So we're going to review and post again, complete that checklist, print those agings, and you will have created a folder on your system that's for your year-end reports. And there you would want to save all of these year-end reports all into that folder in the same location. And then you'll have them available to you if and when you have auditors or questions about your year-end. You'd have all those reports printed to that location. Make sure you get a SQL backup of the Dynamics and the company databases at this point. We're going to close the fiscal and/or calendar year, and I'll show you that. And then we'll save that report to our folder. Navigation to that year-end close is in the sales area under routines and year-end close. So sales under routines is year-end close. You can close either fiscal year, calendar year, or both. This section just shows the last time that the closing was done. And then the check mark shows that we are going to print the report. Definitely want to print the report. And then click the process button. And once this process has completed, then you'll want to go to your fiscal period setup. Sorry, administration. And put a check mark in the module that you just closed so that no one can come back into this period that you're working to close. It would have been the 12th one. You're going to put a check mark here to make sure that no one can post any transactions to that period because you've now closed it for the year. I'll also mention that there is a an optional tax year-end close, and the navigation to that is in this administration area page under routines, where the tax year-end close exists. Again, you'll only do that once, either after sales order processing or after receivables. So you check mark the close year and then process, including the report. Okay, Sarah, do we have any questions?
We do have a question now. The question is, all the modules that get closed, are there any year-end steps that must be done on December 31st if you're on a calendar year basis?
It's not a requirement for you to do that. You can if you're available to. If you don't, that's okay. Then those year-to-date fields that I mentioned earlier in the slides will not be accurate, but all of the functionality will be fine. So you can produce into the next year.
Perfect. Thank you, Sandy.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the only question I see right now.
Great. This screen is a reminder to save these huge reports to a text file or print them to a PDF. These are big reports. You'll want to have them in a file format. So the receivables function, when that happens, the year-end close process summarizes the activity since your last close, right? Last year activity, and the year-end close process clears activity since your last close in the year to date. So to that person who asked that question, it's at the point in time when you do the year-end activity, it clears those year-to-date fields. So if you do it on January 31st, it's going to start with new values for year-to-date as of January 31st. So if you're using those year-to-date numbers, then 12/31 really matters to you. So most of the time people do just continue to work forward and disregard the year-to-date values. And I think we're ready for our next polling.
Next polling question is open. We'll keep it open for a little over a minute here.
Okay. We looked at our tax year end close. So we're now on to our payables management. So we're on page 46 in the workbook. So we're going to post and review all of our batches. We're going to check our batch recovery window, make sure there's nothing in it. Print our payables period end reports, including the historical age trial balance, and reconcile that to the payables GL, and then close that AP fiscal period. So the payables management also has the additional functions of things like 1099s. So we're going to order our 1099 forms and envelopes, verify the 1099 vendor setup. So there is an appendix number 5 that has a smart list that's able for you to verify your 1099 setup. We're going to correct any duplicate vendors. If you have duplicate vendors, there's tools that we can use to be able to bring all that history together so that you are creating only one 1099 for that vendor. So please do give us a call and let us help with that. 1099 data review, and then print the 1099s. And by way of reminder, there are new different types of 1099s. As of last year, there was a new type called the 1099 NEC, which GP, as of the most recent version, which was released with the year-end update, was released in mid-November, so only about a month ago. That 18.5 version has some updates to the 1099 NEC forms that were just released for 2022 forms. So if you need to produce current version 1099s and 1099 NECs, then you would probably want to get in touch with us as soon as possible to schedule your update to the 18.5 version. And then lastly, make sure you alert your AP team. Let them know what your plans are, when you plan to close the module, so that they can be sure and get all those documents that might have lingered on their desk a little too long while they waited for something or approval or whatever, that they get all of those documents entered into your GP and posted through the batches. Let them know so that they know what to prepare for. So we're going to verify our vendor history settings. So very similar to what we did with the customers. We're going to verify those vendor history settings. We can use the smart list to do that with this if necessary. So I'll go back to my GP. I'm going to go to my purchasing area page, into my vendor cards, and over to options, where down here at the bottom I can see that maintain history is marked for this particular vendor. We will have already printed our trial balances, and again, you'll want to use either the age trial balance with options or the historical, depending on if you need a point in time, and validate that against our general ledger to make sure that they're in balance. And then we're going to print our 1099s. So in the routines section is print 1099s. There are some changed values on this window and even within the vendor windows that relate to some things that are newer functionality. So be sure and check those values out. So we're going to be creating dividend, interest, miscellaneous, and then those NEC, non-employee compensation. You can run all of them from this window. It defaults to single feed now. That didn't used to be the case. So be sure you look to see if you've got single feed or continuous that you're going to be running. I don't even think they sell tractor fed ones anymore. You can do the 1099 forms. You can do them in vendor ID or vendor name order, and you can also produce your 1096 form from this. Notice on the ribbon that there are actually two print buttons. There's a print and a print forms. The print button prints the edit list that you can review the edits and review and edit anything that needs to be before you print your actual forms. So printing our 1099s, we took a look at that and the two buttons on the top on the ribbon, what they're used for. This speaks to the 1099 IRS and non-employee compensation forms. So this looks at some of those additional values that exist on your vendor maintenance window, options window, that you would potentially need to be looking at, again, depending on your GP version. So this is as of 18.4, which was 2021 version. The current version is 18.5 for 2022. So things like these will only be available in those later versions. And we certainly recommend that you stay on current versions because of things like this, right? So the tax type, 1099 details, and even the amounts or lower thresholds for 1099 values is something that you could be reviewing to make sure that they work for your environment. There's also DBA information added to vendors. Both the check name and the DBA will print on the 1099s. There's a new tax type that was added last year, right? So the DBA will also print on your 1099 forms. 1099 miscellaneous updates, where you can update that. And then finally, we're ready for our year-end close. So we're on page 54 in the workbook. If your fiscal year doesn't equal your calendar year, you will need to schedule these closes on different dates, right? You can either do fiscal, calendar, or both. So in our purchasing area page, I'm going to go to routines and year-end close. And this definitely needs to be after your 1099s are produced. So you can pick all or fiscal or calendar, make sure the print report is marked. And this one has a button at the bottom, so not sure why it's not consistent, but the button's down here to close the year. Now, make sure you print your reports, but print them to the year-end close folder that we created for you to be able to do that. Again, the year-end close process summarizes the activity since your last close, so your last year-end information, and the year-end close process clears the activity since your last close in the year-to-date fields. So as long as you're not referring to those, you can do this at a time other than 12/31. So these are an example of some of the places where those year-to-date fields show up in GP. So you make sure that you notice that they would not necessarily have accurate values if you don't do those steps on 12/31. Okay, Sarah checking in. Any questions?
No questions right now.
Okay, I'm going to grab a quick sip of water. And our next module is inventory control. So we're on page 56 in the manual. We're going to review and post those inventory stock counts and adjustments. If you do a physical count, make sure you get that posted all the way through. Check our batch recovery window. We're going to print the stock status or historical inventory trial balance reports. I want to make note here that the stock status report was never designed to be the subledger for inventory. Microsoft didn't intend it to do that, and there are some things that get transacted in inventory modules that don't actually get represented on the stock status report. There is a report that was intended, it was particularly built for you to use as your subledger to GL. It's called the Historical Inventory Trial Balance, or HITB is its acronym. If you don't have this report installed, there is a set of steps that's necessary to create the starting point. It's called a HITB reset. And I would hope that you would contact us to be able to take those next steps. It is a significant impact in your environment, your GP environment. We'd be happy to help you with getting that set up so that you can begin using it. We're going to verify our item history settings. We'll do the reconcile and then close the fiscal period. Make sure that you have a Dynamics and company database backup in hand, ready to go back to if necessary. So if you're doing all of your close steps together all at one time, I would suggest that you do the backups, close a module, do the backups, close a module. You may have lots and lots of backups, but if you don't have an immediate backup to go back to, you'd have to go back and redo all the steps that you did if you had to go back all the way to the start. So I'm going to jump back to GP and say that on my inventory area page, in the utilities section is a reconcile. So for any company who uses GP inventory, this is probably something you're familiar with. It's highly recommended that you reconcile the inventory, make note of anything that needs to be updated and or fixed, and then take action on those things um, before you start the year-end close, right? So the reconcile first, and then within the routines section is the year-end close function. So on page 59 in your workbook, there's an indication in a box highlighted in the middle that says leave all boxes unchecked. So to those of you who don't have the workbook, take a screenshot of this and make yourself a note to leave these boxes unmarked. So if you choose to remove discontinued items, there's other steps that we can take to do that other than being a part of your year-end close. We don't really want to remove sold lot attributes or sold receipts and cost changes. Like these were put here for specific purpose, but for the most part, you don't need to do them as a part of your close. And the update item standard cost, there's a separate set of utilities to update standard cost with. We don't recommend that you do it as part of year-end closing. So you'll leave all these boxes unmarked, click the process button, and then make sure that you send your report to the files where we're keeping all of our inventory year-end. Do we have any questions, Sarah?
We do have a question about versions. This person had upgraded in September to 18.4. Do they need to be upgraded to 18.5 in order to do 1099s for 2022?
So the 18.5 version has some form changes to 1099 forms. So if you have to produce 1099 NEC forms, and I'll go ahead and show this on the webinar right now, if you have to produce 1099 NEC forms, then your best scenario is to be on 18.5 because we just learned of these form changes and the ability to add lines to the forms in November of 2022. So if you have 1099 NEC forms, then you might need to update to 18.5. If you're just doing 1099 miscellaneous interest and whatever that other one was, then maybe you don't need to be on 18.5 before 1099 season.
Perfect. Thank you, Sandy.
You're welcome. So in our inventory close, what happened? So even though there's no report that prints, so forgive me, I said something about the reports going to the folder and that actually isn't the case for inventory close. There is no report for inventory close. So this slide talks about what happens when the inventory close process is taking place. So because there's no report, one of the things that I highly recommend that you do is not to leave GP while you've run these kinds of processes. Don't start it and go home for the day, or start it and leave your desk and not come back for a few hours. Like these are processes that you really should be watching your GP functions to make sure that they complete correctly. For this inventory close, if there's some reason for you to wonder about whether or not it took place or is done, you can certainly go to the GP button and to the process monitor to see that there are no open processes left taking place. If there was still something processing in the background, this process monitor will show us what those are. So what's actually happening? The summarized current year information is moved to history. The beginning quantities of each item is updated to be the on-hand quantity. And the quantity sold field for each item is reset to 0. And then we're going to move on to the financial series modules, which starts with fixed assets. So for those of you who are using GP fixed assets, think it's great functionality. If you have fixed assets and not using GP, we'd love to help you get that implemented. So we're going to enter all the activity, asset additions, changes, transfers, retirements. The asset depreciation for the period, process that, and depreciation and other transactions in fixed assets don't automatically process through GL. So make sure that you get the GL posting process complete, that GL batch process, and print your activity reports. Then there's a year-end process to complete those same period end steps, print the activity reports, do your Dynamics and company database backups, and then close the year. So on the financial area page in routines, you would do period end processes for depreciation. Now it's possible if you're using GP fixed assets that you have multiple books. So if you have tax books like AMT and federal, we typically only do the depreciation step at the end of the year. But for internal, you would do that for individual periods so that you can record the depreciation within your GL. So this year-end process, you might have the additional steps of the AMT and federal books. This is the general ledger posting window, so make sure you check it to make sure there's not any batches that need to be processed through the GL. It creates a transaction entry automatically, which then needs to get posted. And then we'll work on our asset year-end function. So on page 66 in your workbook, then we're going to go back to GP, and we're on our financial area page. In routines, under fixed assets is year end. So you can see here that all of those books are here, and it should show your current fiscal year. So when you choose it and insert it, then you would click the continue button and it would process the year end. It does have a year end close report that you want to print and save. And you could potentially close those additional tax books at the end of the year as well. And lastly, our last module is the general ledger. So we're going to look on page 68 and 9 for the checklists. And then on page 70, this is where we are talking on Appendix. In Appendix 6 also shows a way to view all the general ledger account setups. So we need to be sure that our posting types are set properly, because remember, balance sheet accounts are going to roll forward to beginning balances. P&L accounts are going to close to retained earnings. So knowing what the posting types are on all your GL accounts is going to be very important before you push those buttons so that they do the right kinds of an activity. So I'm going to jump over here to GP, and in a standard account maintenance window, I can see that this GL account is a balance sheet type posting. So this section right here is where I'm recording what type of an account it is for that year-end close process. And then in my smart list, I have the ability to be able to create the list of accounts so that I can see that all of my accounts are set with the correct posting type. So on my list, I can see that the accounts at the top, the ones that start with 1,000, all of these are balance sheet accounts, which would be accurate. But as I scroll down the list, I should see all of my balance sheet accounts at the top, depending on how my accounts are numbered. And it should be fairly easy to see anything that pops out in that group that was a P&L account. And then once I get down here to the 4,000, now I started my P&L accounts and should follow with the P&Ls all the way to the bottom. So make sure that you review that very carefully. It's hard to go back from a year-end close to fix one of those GL accounts because of posting type. It is possible, and we are certainly happy to help you with it, but it's easier if we don't have that to contend with. Then in financial setup, I'm going to open my general ledger setup, and there are maintain history accounts. All of these should be marked. Again, if you don't do budget transactions, it's perfectly fine to have that marked. If there's no history, it's not a problem. And then the close to retained earnings account, we need to have an account in this section, or if we're going to close to divisional accounts, that needs to be indicated as well. That's the account it's going to use to close to. And then the allow posting to history is the ability for us to be able to post to a prior closed year. So for example, if you have auditors that come in March and they give you an audit adjustment for 2022 in March of 2023, you can still post that to the 2022 closed year, assuming you have this posting to history box marked. You also would then have to go and open the fiscal period for December of last year, and you can post a general journal entry into last year. Now, you would not want to post a subledger entry. It wouldn't be a payables or transactions, but you can post GL entries into the most recent closed historical year. Then on my financial routines section is year-end closing. This retained earnings account defaulted from my general ledger setup that we just looked at, and it tells me what my general journal entry number is going to be for the close. So I suggest that you jot down what that number is. If for any reason the printout doesn't happen when you do the year-end close process, you can use your standard general journal inquiry window to look up the journal entry number. So you might make a note of what the entry number is. And then on page 72, we can see that there are two things that might happen. One is you might get a error message or an information message that shows that there is a single batch or quick journal transaction has not been posted yet. So if you keep those sales batches that have sales orders in it, those are considered single-use batches, and you may be getting this error message because of those. So it might be appropriate for you to proceed, but you should make sure that you know what the single-use batches are and go back and post anything that's not just for sales orders before you finish the process. And then you can close the year using the button at the bottom. Notice this also is a reverse a historical year functionality on this. Please contact us and let us help you if you need to reverse a historical year. There's many steps that would be most beneficial to you to follow that we are aware of, so let us help you with that. When you click on the close year button, please be patient. Don't double click on close or exit GP during the close process. If you double click on it, you could be closing 2023 as well as 2022. So be very careful that you only click on it once and that you move your mouse away so that you don't accidentally hit it again. Obviously, this is another place where you will have had backups before you got started. So this slide speaks to the balance sheet versus profit and loss accounts. We reviewed that general ledger setup in practice, and now you can see that on our slide deck. Back up again. And I think we're ready for the next polling question.
All right, we've got our next question open for a couple minutes. And Sandy, while we have this running, we did have a question. Somebody said that you had mentioned there was a way to print different reports other than year-end close. I think maybe they're asking what other reports?
So, yeah, so maybe what you're talking about is you would want to print all your period end reports, so the trial balances and those things that you keep for your month end. All of those reports can go in that year-end folder as well. And it is possible to reprint any of these year-end reports if you happen to have missed them, but it's not our first choice. Our first choice would be that you print them when they are available to print and put them in that folder so that you have them available.
Okay, very helpful. I think he also, this person wanted to know about inventory reports specifically.
Okay. So, so the year-end close does not produce a report, but the reconcile that we did as a step before that does. And the historical inventory trial balance is a report that, and I'll quickly show you the navigation to, is the report that you would print to balance to your general ledger. And that one should certainly be in your year-end file as well. So if I'm on the inventory area page in the reports section, I'm going to pick activity and scroll to the bottom, and this historical inventory trial balance is the other report that we would print to keep in our year-end folder that has a date and, right? So through a specific posting date through year-end, that would be our other validation that GL balances to the subledger.
Thanks for showing that.
Yep. So I mentioned that in the financial close that there may be a message, and that's what this one looks like. Now, on that general ledger year-end closing window, Microsoft has produced a status bar on this window. It hasn't always been there. It's in some of the later versions in the last few years. So that status bar shows as it moves across the screen, it shows you the status of the process of closing the year. So again, make sure you don't leave your desk or leave the window or leave for the day, then it shows complete when it's done next to that green status bar as it finishes the process. Please be patient. It can take some time. Now, I don't know about several hours. I don't know that I've seen one take that long, but it can take some time to complete this. So please be careful. Don't do other processes in other companies or switch around in GP. Let the process complete so that you get that done without any issues. We're going to print and save our reports. And you can see here that on this report, it is a general journal entry report that would have printed and saved into your folders, and you can go back and look at it if you need to. This is our confirmation. It shows process complete when it's done, and we've now completed our year end. So a couple of notes. Unlike AP and AR, General Ledger does not need to be closed before posting to the new year. You can close it when you need to. And before closing the year, it's very important to verify those account types. There are several appendix in the back of your workbook, so these slides are just for those of you who may not have chosen to order the workbook yet. So there's an appendix about how to send a message to GP users, the smart list for unposted transactions, to verify history settings. There's also one for setting up account roll-ups. So if you have multiple accounts that relate to, in this case, your COGS, you can create a group that has a way to be able to look at all of those accounts together in a window very similar to the financial inquiry window called account roll-ups. Super helpful. Appendix 5 is to verify 1099 vendor settings, verify GL account setups, reconciling to the GL. So there is a function in GP to be able to reconcile to the GL, and it uses Excel to do it. I would recommend that if you're challenged with reconciling either your AP or AR, to General Ledger, this could be a helpful tool to you, and it's in Appendix 7. If you use bank rec or inventory on this window, I'm not as convinced that you'll get the results that you're looking for. Bank rec should be done within the reconciliation of the bank rec module, not this reconcile to GL, and the inventory should be against that HIT-B report. I think we're ready for our last polling question. Okay, so I have just a couple more slides here quickly before I do. If there's any questions, that would be the priority for me. So any questions, Sarah?
Not right now. Nope.
Okay. So there's a couple slides in the end of this that talk about things like the closer. It's from an ISV or plugin called the Reporting Central. So if you have ongoing challenges with reconciling, this one gives you an ability to do that in a more automated fashion. And then I wanted to mention again that there is separate payroll year-end closing webinars that are taking place later this week. And say to you, I appreciate your time today. I'd be happy to assist you in any way that you would like with your year-end processing. If you'd like more additional assistance from us at LBMC, please do reach out. I'd be happy to help. And I'll turn it back over to you, Sarah.
Thank you. Thank you, Sandy, so much. I know we covered a lot of information today. So if there's any questions you think of after the webinar, please reach out to us and we'd be glad to help you. We will be sending out an email right after this with a link to the recording as well as the slides. It will also include a survey. We'd love to get your feedback on this presentation and also learn about what topics you'd like to know more about. So thanks again for joining us today, and we hope you have a great rest of the day. And thanks again, Sandy.